In fact, being human calls us to express it, to release it, to declare the pain that we are going through. Pain demands to be felt. And if we push it down, it's just going to make us sick. The last week of 2020 was one of the most devastating weeks of my entire life. I had been estranged from my dad for about 3 years when unexpectedly he passed away. And then only just a few days later, my brother would take his life. It plunged me and my family into grief in 2022. And it was an extremely painful and emotional experience that I hope not a lot of people have to go through. However, when discussing grief, it is a common experience that all of us will have at one point or another. Maybe it won't be as traumatic or complicated as my grief was, but we all are going to experience it. So how do we pray through grief? How do we pray through the waters and painful waves that threaten to drown us? I want to talk about that today. Before we begin, my name is Mariah and I'm a certified Christian mental health coach, and I'm here to help you grow in emotional and spiritual maturity through biblically based holistic practices. For a deeper dive on emotional health, be sure to grab the free link in the description below. That's going to be a free guide letting you know how to really work through emotions if it's something that overwhelms you. And be sure to join me over on my socials where we have conversations like this and more. Oh, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and click the notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. Maybe you haven't gone through the loss of a person. Maybe you haven't experienced a wild grief like I have. And by the way, we don't really compare grief around here. Everyone experiences it in one way or another. But perhaps the way that you have experienced it is not through the death of a person, but maybe it's through the death of a dream or through the death of a transition in life. In order for us to know how to pray through grief, we have to clearly define it. And so today I want to define what grief is. I want to help us work through what our physical reaction to grief can be and what does the Bible have to say about grief. Now, grief in its simplest terms is a loss. It is a sense of loss. So whether it's the loss of a person, the loss of a job, maybe it's a good grief where you are transitioning into a new season of life. Maybe you got married or you have a new child and you're transitioning into something new, but you're also losing what was. And there can be this underlying sense of grief that can make it hard to go into the next season. We all are going to go through loss at some point. And it's really important for us to define what grief is. Now, grief is a very heavy emotion. It's one that can really weigh us down. Many people, when they are experiencing grief physically, have a loss of appetite, tightness in their chest, feeling overly sensitive to maybe noise, have a lack of energy, just very lethargic, hard to sleep. Feeling grief is like feeling a weighted jacket on you at all times, no matter how much someone tries to cheer you up or lighten the mood. It's always there in the background, just feeling heavy. When we experience emotions, emotions are based off of our thought process to what we're seeing in the world around us. As our mind is processing what we are experiencing, it's then going to tell our bodies to react physically. And grief has a very strong way of pulling you into emergency mode, especially if you have lost a person. Understanding that your body is going to react to the emotion is not something that should be shameful, but rather it's something that we should understand so we can have compassion for ourselves and have compassion for other people. When we are experiencing grief, it's not something that we are able to just rush through. We have to be able to process through the different moment by moment waves of grief that come up. A couple of ways to help that physically are this: using aromatherapy. Scent is a powerful tool and it really can help comfort us in times of heavy emotions. Using a self-hug or a weighted blanket. Like I said, grief can feel really heavy, and so just having that external feeling, that external pressure can help release some of that heaviness that we might experience. playing calming music in the background, box breathing, whatever tool it is. These are great ways for us to be able to experience the wave of grief without feeling like it's going to drown us. So that's a couple of ways that your body experiences grief, but how does the Bible talk about grief? What does it have to say? The Bible has so much to say about grief. My favorite story, though, when it comes to grief is the story of Lazarus. If you have not heard about the story of Lazarus, Lazarus was a friend of Jesus whom was very sick at one point. Jesus had received news that he was close to dying. As Jesus was making his way towards his friend, he then received secondary news that his friend died. And Jesus's response was to weep. Now we say this word, but we don't like what the visual is. If you've ever seen someone weeping, it's not like just a little tear that they're pushing away from you. It is uncontrollable sobbing, yelling, crying, moaning, this just very physically responsive way of just expressing pain. But why did Jesus even express pain? Because he knew that he was going to heal Lazarus. And I love this story because it's such a reminder that even though Jesus was fully God, he was also fully man. Being human doesn't mean that we have to sweep away the pain that we experience. In fact, being human calls us to express it, to release it, to declare the pain that we are going through. Pain demands to be felt. And if we push it down, it's just going to make us sick. And Jesus, in his divinity and in his humanity, embraced pain without any shame. Jesus didn't feel the need to be strong and to keep it together. And in showing his vulnerability, his area of pain, he has invited us to be able to then experience the same thing. We don't have to keep the walls up when it comes to pain. We don't have to feel like somehow we're going to be a stronger Christian or we're going to be able to not be touched by the pain, but rather when we embrace the pain, it is God's way of being able to flow through us. I love the verse where it says that Jesus was acquainted with grief. And as someone who has been through an intense grief, but just my whole life I have been touched by grief, it is a comforting verse because you can tell the people who have not been experiencing an intense grief, who have not had to go through deep loss. It's not a shame to them. In fact, I'm glad. But there is this extra tenderness when someone goes through grief and allows themselves to be softened by it. So as you're experiencing the pain of grief, if you're feeling it in your body, as you're going through these different waves, how I want you to pray about grief is I want you to be able to recognize that grief is a sense of loss. And it's okay to tell God, I am so upset that this loss is happening. Even if I didn't really like what I'm losing in the first place. The sense of better the devil I know than the devil I don't is such a strong thought in our human existence. But go before God and tell him, say, God, I don't want to be losing something right now. I don't like that I'm experiencing this pain. But you, speaking about God, have felt this pain for me. You know what I'm going through. You know my sorrow. Please help me to remember that you are with me, that you comfort me and you guide me, because God also promises to be a comfort to those who experience grief. And remind me, as you're praying, remind me that grief only lasts a little while until he comes and makes everything right. Hopefully this was an encouraging lesson for you. If you have thoughts, if you've experienced grief, let me know. I'd love to be able to pray for you, and I'd love to just be comforted together. There's something powerful about openly admitting the grief that you have experienced. And so I pray that we are able to walk through this very challenging emotion together and go forward in loving people who are also going through the deepest grief as well. Thank you so much for joining me.